What do you say to someone you love who is dying? In this video, I'm going to give you some guidance on what to say to a loved one who is dying, maybe what not to say, and how I've navigated this myself. First and foremost, don't worry about getting it perfect. Just show up. Make sure you show up physically, if you can, for this person. And it's going to be messy. It's not going to be perfect. Generally speaking, I always say try to speak honestly from your heart and don't try to make things better. It's not better. This is not a good time. So emotions like sadness and anger and regret, whatever they may be feeling, is okay to be expressed. You, as the loved one, don't need to make things better. Sometimes the best thing to do is show up and be quiet. Don't say anything. Allow them to lead the conversation. I have a really good real life example of this that happened to me when I was a new hospice nurse, which taught me a really good lesson in just being quiet and showing up honestly, answering honestly. It provided an amazing connection. So this story is in my book. So if you get my book, you'll be able to read it. This woman, when I showed up to her house, I was her admitting hospice nurse. When she answered the door, I was surprised because usually there's someone else answering the door, but this time the patient herself answered the door. She was kind of cold, which is okay, but it was very clear she did not want me there, and she was strictly keeping to business. So I did that too. I was reading the room and kind of following what she wanted and needed, and I just started doing my regular spiel about hospice and how we can help her and what to expect and all the things. She remained cold almost the whole time. And then slowly I could see through her body language that she was like warming up a little bit. She started like laying down on the couch. She was putting her hands behind her head. She was staring up at the ceiling in thought. I finished my admission. So I was sort of just sitting there typing things out and documenting, and she was just sitting there quietly as well. And I allowed us to be quiet together. And in my mind, I was kind of thinking like, do I say something? Should I fill the space? And I just thought, no, I don't need to. We can just be sitting here quietly as I get my documentation done. And as I sat there for a few minutes quiet, which people get really uncomfortable with being quiet, but I'm trying to help you cultivate that this is okay. That gave her space to say what she wanted to say. And suddenly I hear her say, I've been a Christian my whole life and I believe in God, but am I really going to take my last breath, close my eyes, open them, and see God? That's what she said to me. And I looked up at her and I realized this was not a rhetorical question. She was actually asking me this question. And I kept a cool and calm face, but inside I was like, oh my God, she's actually asking me this question. She wants me to answer this question. What am I going to say to her? Like, should I just say, yes, you'll see God? I'm kind of panicking, like, holy, what am I going to say? I took a deep breath and I just thought, I let it be quiet. And I just looked at her and I said the truth. The truth is, I don't know what's going to happen. None of us do. Even if I think I know, I don't really know. So I just took a deep breath and said, I don't know. And she looked at me and started laughing. She let out a big cackle. And then because she laughed, I laughed. And then she goes, well, I guess I'll find out. And then I laughed and I said, I guess you will. And we had this big laugh together, all because she was willing to say something vulnerable. I was willing to say something vulnerable back, which was, I don't know. It'd be so much easier for me to say, of course, yes, you'll see God. It'll be okay. You're going to see your loved ones. I have beliefs of that, of course, but I don't really know. So I just showed up honestly. And because of that, we had this deep connection. We laughed, she hugged me, we hugged. And by the time I left there, we were laughing and talking. She was warm. Again, she hugged me and thanked me goodbye. All because I feel like we were both willing to show up and answer things honestly. So you don't have to always have the answer. It was such a great lesson for me. Now, because I understand that people just want an authentic connection, it's so much easier for me to show up and be in those situations that can feel so uncomfortable. And sometimes you'll have the answers, sometimes you won't, and that's okay. Just be there and show up authentically. Okay, so now I'm going to give you an actual do's and don'ts list so you can take this home with you and really apply it to your life. So the do's: do practice empathy. Be empathetic to their situation. You can always say things like, I'm here for you. However you want me to show up for you, I'm willing to show up. Or just say, I'm coming over and doing your laundry. Just something where you're providing support, even if it isn't verbal support. Because necessarily people don't need verbal support. They just need physical support. Make sure you can listen to what they're saying. So if they're saying really hard things that are hard for you to hear because you love them, like, I'm angry, I'm dying, I don't want to die, or I'm scared, I'm dying, that can be really, really hard to hear when this is your loved one. I encourage you to please just listen. That is not the time for you to say, don't be afraid, it's gonna be okay. You don't have to say any of those things. Allow them to say how they feel. Actively listen. You can even respond with the truth. I'm scared too. I'm angry too. However you feel, you can respond honestly with them. Always, always respect their choices, even if you're not agreeing with what they want. This is their life. These are their choices. You can ask them questions about why they're choosing these things. Maybe it'll help you understand better if you understand why they're choosing certain things, but always respect their choices. This is their life, their end of life journey. You can encourage them to share their feelings. If this is someone who never shared their feelings throughout their whole life, they're not going to suddenly be at the end of life and know how to share how they're feeling. So you might run into that a lot. Now, if you want them to try to share, you can start sharing your feelings about how you're feeling and about what's going on with you during this time to hopefully help them open up and share their feelings too. But again, remember, people die the way they lived. So just because they're dying doesn't mean they're suddenly going to become emotionally mature and be able to talk about all the things they never could talk about in the first place. So meet them where they're at, and we're all just trying to do our best. Remember that. Last but certainly not least, there are many things you can do that I'm not mentioning on this to-do list. But try to be as normal as possible as well. Do the things you normally do if you could. If you love hanging out and watching murder mysteries at night, come over and do that. Always ask them too, how can I support you? How would you like me to support you? You can always just ask. And if you're having a difficult time with this, remember, if they're on hospice already, you can ask your hospice team, the social worker, the chaplain, to have a family meeting to start opening the discussion up. Now the don'ts. The don'ts. Avoid cliches at all costs. Please do not say things like, everything happens for a reason, or time heals all wounds, or don't say that, you're gonna be fine. Or even worse, I had a second cousin once removed from my brother who drank this purple drink every day, and his cancer was cured. Now he's living a great life. No, people don't need to hear those things. And I know you're just trying to be helpful. I know we are all just trying to be helpful, but those things aren't helpful. Do not give advice unless asked. Do not give advice unless they've asked you. This is a fine line, so do not overwhelm them with your emotions. So it's good to talk about how you're feeling. Yes. There's a fine line when you start crossing that line where you're making it about you and you're making it about your emotions and how you feel about the situation. So there's a fine line. It's good to be open, but don't burden them with how you're feeling. Go somewhere else. Talk to someone else about that. And last but not least, don't impose your own beliefs on them. Just like that story I told you, where that woman was saying she was a Christian and she believed that, she asked, am I gonna close my eyes and wake up and see God? Now I think she is, but it's not my place to say, yes, you are. Or if you know that your loved one believes something different than you and you're worried about that, please keep that to yourself. This is not the time for you to say your beliefs about an afterlife or their particular situation or their beliefs, or if you think what they're doing is wrong. This is not the time for that. This is the time for you to actively listen and support and be empathetic and compassionate. When I was 17, my best friend died, and I go into that story in my book in the grief chapter where I talk about how I navigated that and certain things that helped me. So I'm going to read you a little portion of that. Side note, this is the part, if you guys ordered my audiobook, this is one of the parts where I did not expect to cry, and then I could not stop crying. So I'm curious to see how that turned out because it definitely sounds like I'm crying, I think, in the audiobook version. So let me know. When I was 17, my best friend died suddenly. I remember getting the call and falling to my knees. I remember feeling shock and disbelief. I ran out of my front door and through the yard into the woods by my house. My mom was yelling after me. I remember feeling like if I could just run fast enough, I could run away from this, literally. I didn't want to believe what I just heard, so I ran. I can still feel the adrenaline as I write this. I can still feel the adrenaline as I read this. The several weeks after her death are still a blur. At the time, I knew nothing about loss. But looking back, I realized that I experienced a variety of complicated emotions and the way I grieved changed through the years. The main feeling that lasted was guilt. Guilt of surviving when she didn't. Guilt of not being there the night she died. Guilt for grieving too much or too little. Recently, I was talking with a close friend about how I'd been thinking a lot lately about my friend who had died, and that I was experiencing some unfamiliar feeling about her, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I journaled about it that night, and as strange as this might sound, I realized that I had felt resentment towards her. I was actually mad at her. After 20 years of her being gone, I finally let myself address the fact that before she died, I was mad at her. Silly teenager stuff that never had been addressed, but then she died. And I carried around that anger for 2 decades and didn't even realize it. It feels embarrassing to admit because it was so silly, but acknowledging my anger and resentment set me free. I didn't even need a resolution. I just needed to allow myself to admit that I felt complex emotions that I didn't expect to feel, including anger. That night, I wept and woke up the next morning feeling so light and free. So I read that to you because grief is complicated. And I had felt many things over the years, experiencing, from after her death. And it's just funny how things slowly unfold as you grieve. And I think it's so important to acknowledge that you might feel all types of strange. Like I think I didn't admit for 20 years that I had been mad at her. Mad at her for some silly teenager stuff that I just never admitted because now she's gone. And it took 20 years for me to even realize that. And then I was set free once I did. I encourage you to realize and understand that we can't do this perfectly. This is messy. Grief is messy, it's complicated, and give yourself some grace and feel whatever you're feeling. Don't worry about getting it perfect, just show up.